Final Fantasy X turned out nothing like what I imagined. While my experience with the Final Fantasy series was still limited at the time of writing this video, having only played 12, 9, and 7, from everything I'd heard over the years about this 10th installment, including all the hype when it came out, I was expecting a traditional JRPG with high production values, lots to explore and things to do, and plenty of side content. Final Fantasy X is most of those things, but all at the wrong time. My biggest gripe with the experience is that it's incredibly linear and hardly feels like a proper RPG. I often wanted to be able to run around and do things at my own pace, but for the most part, the game doesn't allow that until near the end. This is more of a conflict of expectations versus reality on my part, and once I understood what kind of experience I was in for, I enjoyed FF10 for what it is, but I still wish it went for a more traditional structure. However, I can see how the series started heading more and more in the scripted sequence direction since FF7, and 10 feels like the culmination of that. For one, the music is fantastic, the best I've heard so far in a Final Fantasy game, and it's not close. The added synths and poppy production of several songs fits the world and characters well. There's even a smooth sax that I loved hearing in one of the later tracks. Wandering Flame, anyone? That's probably my favorite Final Fantasy song so far. It's just so smooth. Spira as a world is meticulously crafted and holds up against the best of the best settings as far as JRPGs go. The cinematics too, including the cutscenes, are all top-notch for 2001 and hold up today. Some of the best parts of the game are learning about Tidus, his past and conflict with his father, the threat of sin, and how it all ties together. All in all, this is probably the best story of the Final Fantasy games I've played. 7's was more emotional, 9's better written, and 12's more epic in scope, but FF10 includes a perfect mix of all the aforementioned, plus great character moments. The combat, too, is more complex than it seemed at first. While Final Fantasy X is overall a rather easy game, I don't mind since easy combat can be fun as long as plenty of viable options are available to the player, which I'll discuss shortly, along with the sphere grid. It also helps that the battle theme is amazing, right on par with Final Fantasy VII's, the gold standard of JRPG battle themes if you ask me, and on some days I think I prefer this one even more. Crafting a battle theme that doesn't get tiresome for the entirety of a game is quite the feat, and Nobuo Uematsu and team smashed it out of the park on this one. Beyond the music, I love being able to swap a party member in and attack all on the same turn. This provides the illusion of having more freedom than you actually do, which goes a long way in a combat system like this, where many enemies have specific weaknesses designed for only one or two particular party members to exploit. Aeons are a nice twist on the classic Final Fantasy summons, and in many ways I prefer this system to how summons were implemented in, say, FF7 or 9. Instead of feeling like I had to use summons whenever possible, it's nice to be able to treat them as a get-out-of-jail-free card to clean up when a battle is taking too long or against certain tough bosses. This is all relative though. As mentioned before, the combat in FF10 is never very difficult, but due to how integral summons are to Yuna's story, it felt natural to pull them out from time to time and wreck shop. Next up, the sphere grid. I've read that the international version of FF10 as well as the remastered both feature a new sphere grid with more branching paths, but since I played the original North American PS2 release, I can't judge those versions. However, the standard sphere grid offered enough flexibility for me to spend plenty of time in there figuring out who to teach what, how best to use the special spheres, and how to become as powerful as possible as quickly as possible. Turns out, as in many JRPGs, the answer to that is magic. My main party consisted of Tidus, Yuna, and Lulu for much of the game. While I understand that Lulu's effectiveness falls off in the post-game, during the main story she's a straight-up killer. I used black magic spheres to also teach Yuna some of the most powerful spells and had little trouble obliterating everything with my 2-mage lineup. Tidus, on the other hand, was my time mage, and the combination of haste plus strong melee attacks made him just as effective as my black mages. I'd swap Auron in when I needed massive damage, Waka for flyers, and that leaves poor Kamari, who never saw much use. There's always the one lame duck, right? Even he, though, has his niche, and if I were to play the game again, I'd give him more of a chance. Speaking of the post-game, I didn't do much of it. I like to play much of an RPG's side content while I'm going through the main story and take on the final boss as the last thing I do in a game. That feels right to me. Defeating the final boss closes the story out gracefully and should be the end cap of the experience. In FF10, that's just not possible, as most of the side content becomes available only after finishing the story. Yet, after defeating Brask's final Aeon, I lost any desire to keep playing. While this is typical for me and I'm used to it, it does make me wish FF10 offered more than a hallway filled with cutscenes for most of the game. It's a shame too, because what's there in the main story truly is astounding. All the environments are beautiful, the English voice acting is decent, the music's sublime, and the story itself is pretty good for a late-era Square JRPG. I didn't see any of the twists coming, which is more than I can say for most other JRPG series. Tales, anyone? Finally, for all of the game's linearity and lack of side quest content available during the critical path, it still took me 41 hours to finish the main story, and I spent a total of 45 hours with the game, putting it right around the sweet spot for JRPGs in terms of length. I've touched on them a bit, but let's discuss more about the characters. FF10s are great. Pound for pound, this is the best cast of the Final Fantasy games I've played so far. While it took me a while to warm up to Wakka, I eventually did, and each of the other characters had at least one or two interesting story hooks that kept me engaged. Tidus is a standout for obvious reasons, as he's the key to the plot, but Yuna's journey to become a summoner also kept me interested the whole time. Auron, too, felt like a natural inclusion due to his relevance to the plot and history with Tidus' father, and even the less important characters like Lulu and Kamari never felt superfluous, unlike, say, Cait Sith from FF7 or Freya and Kina from FF9. Wait, I didn't mention Riku. That's because she's barely a character. When she was first introduced, I thought she was going to be important to the plot since she was used to familiarize Tidus with the future of the world of Spira, and since I remember her being featured prominently in the game's marketing back in 2001. But she quickly became nothing more than eye candy. I don't have anything against eye candy, in fact I quite like it in my JRPGs, but there's simply not much to say about her beyond that. Alright, what else is there to cover? Oh right, Blitzball. It's not fun. I played the mandatory match for the story and never touched it again. Maybe if I were a kid with tons of free time I could have gotten into it, but there's nothing there that appealed to me as a guy with a ton of JRPGs in my backlog. Janky controls, hard to understand rules, and a severely underpowered starting roster made Blitzball a chore rather than an entertaining piece of side content, and that's all I have to say about it. And finally, I want to stress how disappointing the fact that this game is basically a hallway simulator. I've heard the same criticisms about FF13, but it really started here, right? I don't know, it's not my preferred style of JRPG, that's all. Okie dokie, it's tier list time. Let's take a look. Last time, FF7 landed all the way up at S, but I'm not so hot on 10. While I enjoyed it overall and the presentation blew me away, the gameplay is lacking to the point where it doesn't feel like an RPG outside of combat, and the story, for all its strengths, is still kind of forgettable. So much happens, but at the same time I can't help but think this is where the series started to get a little more out there and confusing in its storytelling. Throwing a whole bunch of concepts and ideas at the player doesn't make a story good. I'd rather have one that's well written and simply told any day. While 10's story is my favorite of the series so far, it still doesn't rank among the best JRPG stories I've played. Well, that brings me to the end of this review. Wait, Final Fantasy X has a sequel? It's the first Final Fantasy game to have one, and it's called 10-2 of all things? I'm not sure a review of Final Fantasy X could be complete without at least touching on its successor, so it's a good thing I played 10-2 immediately afterward. I'll talk about that one in my next Newcomer's Perspective video. Thanks for watching. Leave a like for that algorithm, share your thoughts on Final Fantasy X below, subscribe for more videos on RPGs, and have a blessed day.